What we done started. Look at what we done started. This the people party.
Peace and love, party people. It's Talib Kweli, the BKMC, and the place to be. You are now rocking with the best podcast of the world, the People's Party Podcast. And always, and as usual, I got my lovely and talented co-host, the best co-host in the podcast game, Jasmin Leigh, in the place to be. What's up, Jasmin?
Where's my claps, guys? You're here for a reason. You know, one of my absolutely favorite people, besides you, Talib, is here today.
Oh, okay. I thought you were about to do a monologue.
Oh, no. I'm not going to take your job.
You know, I don't always rock blonde hair.
But when I do.
I rock the fuck out of it.
I rock the fuck out of it.
One of your favorite people, huh?
Yes.
One of my favorite people, too. So we share that in common. Today's guest is a legend in the world of comedy. He's an icon, a writer, a director, an actor. He has roasted some of the most famous people in the world. He has created some of the most biting, fantastic roast in history. He brought us the roast battle, which our friend Jasmin was on multiple times. He's burned everyone from William Shatner to Pam Anderson, Justin Bieber, Alec Baldwin. He's even gone after Abraham Lincoln and Anne Frank. But it would be limiting, very limiting and unfair to say that this is just a roast comic, because I've seen this man operate and work on stage. He's one of the best comedians I've ever seen working. He's so much more than what you see in the roast battles. He is a USO tour comedian, an author, a voice actor, an award-winning filmmaker. His documentary Patriot Act won the Best Film Award at the Comedia Film Festival. You've seen him on Crashing, Ghost Adventures, Children's Hospital. You've heard him on The Simpsons, on Family Guy, Batman, the Brave and the Bold. We're going to talk about Batman. He's been in 15 movies, over 15 movies, no sign of stopping. Newark, New Jersey's own, a dear friend of Jasmine's, a good friend of mine, the motherfucking Roastmaster General, Jeff Ross is in the house.
Thank you, TK.
What's up, Jeff Ross?
Thank you, Mr. Green, Miss Lee. Thank you both. Glad to finally be here.
Wait, you forgot one, Talib.
What'd I forget?
He is the reason I met you. Therefore, the reason I am here as the world's best co-host on the world's best podcast.
That's right. Jeff Ross is part of the origin story of People's Party.
I love that so much. Fills me with pride and joy.
Yeah, I went to Jeff's house for a party, and I thought that Jasmine was his girlfriend. I was like, look at what's going on over here with Jeff.
Because I'm always over there.
You're always over there.
Yeah.
And then we became friends.
Yes.
And it's funny, I started like going out with Jasmine just to hang out with her, to see if we vibed.
Yeah.
And I guess to the outside people looking in, that looked like a date. So my friend Sunny Anderson, when she came on to do the show, she was like, yeah, that's your girl, right, that you do the show with. Right. I was like, no, it's not my girl. She's like, yeah, well, remember we went out and she was with you, and I was like, oh, I was like auditioning her. So I was like courting her.
Yes.
You guys were you were auditioning your chemistry together.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jasmine's a very special person in my life, and the fact that you met at my house makes me really happy, because I'm the son of a caterer, Talib. Yes. I love bringing people together. I love when people eat, swim, have fun, and make new friends through me. Nothing makes me happier. So
right. Speaking of swimming, your pool is fantastic.
Thank you.
It turns out roasting people gets you a nice pool.
An infinity pool.
Yeah. It costs an infinity amount of money, too. But that was like 3 New Year's ago. Yeah. I opened for John Mayer and Dave Chappelle, Controlled Danger at the Forum, and then the next day, on New Year's Day. I've always had a tradition, ever since high school, of having parties on New Year's Day, because it takes the pressure off New Year's Eve if you have somewhere to go on New Year's Day.
Well, that was a good time, and shout out to John and Dave. That's a great show, Controlled Danger.
Yep.
One thing I love about Roast Battle is after every battle we hug, that's the rule. Tell me how you came up with that.
Oh, okay. Well, I love this question because I almost never talk about people I don't like. For me, roasting is a sign of affection. If someone takes the time, not bullying, not trolling, but I mean, if someone takes the time to write a well-crafted insult about me, I take that as a compliment. They care enough to write the very best.
Right.
And when my pal Brian motherfucking Moses started coming out with the roast battles at the Comedy Store, I'd seen, versions of roasting, and I was always sort of like, But when the way he did it was off a fight. Two open micers were having an argument in the parking lot at the Comedy Store about stealing material or some nonsense, and Moses had the insight to say, don't fight, we're comics, verbal sparring upstairs tomorrow night in the belly room after the open mic. And, that was so organic and so much about, I'm a black belt in karate, so the idea that you can diffuse a situation, de-escalate a situation with words really appealed to me. On top of that, it was roasting. And I watched it a couple of times, and I went off at home, and I wrote out rules of roast battle to answer your question. And the three obvious things were, you want original content, so it had to be original material only. The other one was no physical contact, couldn't touch, because I'd seen people poke at each other. These are amateurs a lot of times. They would really get in it, especially the women. Remember, Jasmin? The women would slap each other, and it got pretty wild for a while.
Yeah, it definitely got crazy.
It got all.
Who'd you slap?
I didn't slap anybody, thankfully, but losing a battle is actually how I met Dave Chappelle, so I'm not opposed to it.
And I thought if every battle ends with a hug, then I could endorse this concept. Yeah. Then it's something that is going to bring people together, not tear them apart.
So you're a black belt. What if somebody sweeps the leg? What do you do in that situation?
What do you mean?
Like in Cobra Kai, like sweep the leg.
I make fun of their mom. I always use karate as self-defense. Luckily, I haven't had to use it as an adult. As a kid, I broke up fights. I kind of neutralized some bullies as a young boy, and I didn't like people who got getting picked on. I'd always kind of get in the middle of those kind of situations. But I do think it's helped me in that it gave me the confidence to roast people, to talk smack for a living.
Because they can't beat you afterwards.
Or they're less likely to take a swing at me if they know I can block. I remember I was
fluid like water.
Right.
You mentioned Newark. Growing up in Brick City, there was no phys ed. We were in a poor part of town, and all of Newark was kind of rough back in the late '60s and stuff like that, early '70s. And my mom dragged me against my will to a karate school just so I'd have something physical to do. And I didn't want to go. I didn't understand it. It wasn't my something I was interested in, but it did sort of give me thick skin, and it taught me how to be really good at something. It taught me that hard work pays off. And that was probably the best lesson, is self-respect, discipline, respect from others, but also gave me a lot of confidence.
So my next question here, and I don't always let the people behind the fourth wall here, but my next question
Wait, I gotta add one thing that I never brought up that'll make Jasmin laugh, because she's got a baby now. My mom dragged me to the school, to this karate school. And now I'm doing karate like 6 months, and she's kind of proud of herself that I got a little coordination. I'm now 7 years old. And I did something bad, and she slapped me.
Oh, no.
And I instinctively blocked it.
It's like I can see the Matrix.
Oh, my God.
He's like Neo.
And I sprained my mom's finger. She had to get a splint, but she was laughing so hard that I knew karate and blocked her. And she was proud that
That's dope.
I learned something. So.
That's a great
God.
story.
Yeah.
So my next question is, I think you mentioned the phrase thick skin in every interview you do. It's a very important phrase to you.
Yes.
You have a podcast, Thick Skin.
Yeah.
So we right here,
Yeah.
because you came with the thick skin thing. Talk about having that thick skin and how it served you in life.
Well, it goes back to my earliest days as a human being. And I don't know if I've told this story before, but I was crawling around on the floor of my grandparents' house. I might have told it to Jasmin privately, but I was a baby. And my grandmother, Nana Helen, she was boiling water. I'm drinking tea. I'd never drink tea, but I happen to have asked for tea today. And she tripped over me. And she poured boiling water on my back as an infant.
Wow.
I still have the scar. Still have a gnarly shoulder back here.
Wow.
And I don't know if I cried. I don't know if I was in shock. But my Pop Jack, my grandfather, whose ring I wear to this day, this bolt from a submarine, he picked me up and he ran me about a dozen blocks in the Bronx where they live to a hospital. And I don't know what it did to me I have to assume it gave me that thick skin.
I didn't know you were going to be so literal.
If you're gonna dish it out, you have to be able to take it, and I can take it. Like, yeah, I'm sensitive. I'm a sensitive artist, like anybody else. I'm a human being, but I do think that feeling pain as a baby toughened me up. You know, my parents kind of only they raised me just enough. Like, they kind of pushed me across the finish line as becoming of raising me. But beyond that, I have to try to imagine what they were trying to teach me and the places they were trying to get me to.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know if people know, but you lost your parents at an early age. And people often say that good comedy comes from a place of pain. And how have you used comedy as a coping mechanism throughout your life?
Probably in a million different ways. Some of them I'm not even cognizant of, probably. I'll take it to the most recent example, since we've been talking about the way back past. Pandemic, lonely time, you lose everything, right? You find out who your friends are. A year goes by, and I realize, man, it's good to have a real life beyond comedy. It's good to remember that comedy is not everything, that you have relationships and a family and other interests. But then as the pandemic wore on and on and on, going back outside, making people laugh, bringing joy to people who are depressed. I mean, you saw how good the crowds are down in Yellow Springs outside. You know, I was going up with Craig Robinson, and he asked me to go to dinner to see Dom Herrera, a buddy of ours, during the dark days of the winter. And it was cold out. We went to see Dom, and afterwards, Craig's feeling good. He's like, follow me to this spot in North Hollywood. I had no idea what he was doing. I followed him up because he's Big Papa, and I follow him everywhere. If he says, come with me, I go with him.
Right.
And he parks, and he walks into a little tent, and there's 100 people outside.
Wow.
Bundled up with blankets and jackets, and he's doing 2-3 minutes, and I'm like, oh, I gotta see what's going on. So I park. I go in the dark in his parking lot to pee. I'm peeing, and midstream I hear my name. So I'm zip up, run out, and now it's Ross and Robinson for 30 minutes at this outside spot. And it's just raw. It's just Craig, no piano, it's just me and him kind of just talking. And we did that like 20 times. We did it on New Year's Eve in front of 40 of our friends. Tiffany Haddish came by, and we all kind of were on stage together. Craig's playing piano. Me and Tiffany are kind of emceeing with the crowd. And stand-up gave me, like, freedom again. Like, my brain suddenly had a purpose. I felt stifled just being home for so long. I liked being in my own bed for the year and a half. Like, that was refreshing in a weird way. Like, I'd never stayed home as an adult.
Right, me neither.
But stand-up, being able to, like, rip into people, make people laugh, think of creative thoughts, and then go execute them that night. And also just sort of seeing the comics again kind of lifted me back up. And that was a major coping mechanism. Early on, stand-up gave me a social life, a way to talk to women, a way to express myself creatively. I went to film school, and I really thought that would be my path. But in the end, I realized that stand-up was like a superpower, and roasting was like magic. Suddenly I had a backstage pass to the world.
Yeah.
I was going everywhere from, the grotto at the Playmate Mansion to war zones in Fallujah.
Right.
Because I was able to make fun of people without pissing them off. So it's given me everything. It's given me a purpose, it's given me notoriety, and it's given me an infinity pool.
An amazing infinity pool. My daughter actually went swimming for the first time in that.
She's got a VIP pass in my house.
Not bad for a Jersey boy.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Maybe you have some insight into this. There's something about Jersey, Brooklyn guys, New York guys, they're made. It's like, I feel like being from Jersey gives you just enough of a chip on your shoulder, because you got to grow up rooting for the New York teams, watching the New York TV stations, listening to New York radio. We didn't have Jersey shit back then.
Right.
I think it's a little bit like why there's so many funny Jersey people and so many funny Canadians, because they have that with America.
Yeah.
There's like an outsider's looking in kind of perspective that you never really lose.
Yeah, in New York, we call that bridge and tunnel.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm making fun, but I agree with what you're saying. Definitely. I think you nailed it.
You must have grown up feeling cooler than people from Jersey.
I mean, we just interviewed Raekwon the chef from Wu-Tang Clan. And he talked about the chip on the shoulder that people in Staten Island had, and how they're like, we're so good, but we're not Harlem,
right.
We're not Brooklyn. He said a term that I couldn't help but feel warm and fuzzy inside. He said, everybody know that Brooklyn is the valedictorian of all the boroughs.
Oh my gosh.
I was like,
we're not even a borough, so.
And Jersey's the armpit of the entire country. Best show I ever did was with Wu-Tang in San Francisco. Completely unexpected. I got a message saying, would you want to introduce, it's outside at Clusterfest. Would you want to introduce Wu-Tang? And I did, and I got to meet them all before the show. And then afterwards, RZA brought me out, and I did my hour show following Wu-Tang.
Wow.
I might be the only comedian ever to follow Wu-Tang in front of thousands of people. It was pretty cool, especially as a fan. Ju-Tang.
Ju-Tang Clan.
Well, Jeff, you happen to be the only thing from Jersey that I do like. So.
Thank you.
Hey, you like Jon Stewart and Springsteen, the boss?
And Sinatra.
Sinatra?
Jersey. I
Jerry
almost got
Lewis.
arrested in Jersey. You've been roasting from a young age thanks to your Uncle Murray, a.k.a. Mean Murray. And you used to roast in the house, if I'm not mistaken. What was your experience like then, and how quickly did you realize that roasting was a truly unique art form?
It took a while. My Uncle Murray, Mean Murray is what we call him. I love the research that you do on this podcast, both of you. It's so awesome, and it makes me feel like I've actually accomplished something.
That's good.
From these nonsensical, wacky relatives of mine. Like something spiraled
right. Your grandmother
upward.
you were talking about, you had called her a feminist, right?
Which, oh yeah,
and
my
she
great-grandma Rosie.
started that business.
Yeah, catering hall.
Yeah, we did our research.
I love this. My Uncle Murray was a World War II veteran. Helped liberate. He was a medic in the U.S. Army. He helped liberate a concentration camp from the Nazis to release the Jewish people. He had quite a life. And when he came back, he was kind of like a ball buster. No nonsense. Wouldn't wait on lines. Couldn't really suffer fools.
I wouldn't either.
My kind of guy.
I was a little, not spoiled, but I was his nephew's son. And I wasn't going to have to fight in that kind of war, probably. And I was going to have we weren't rich by any means, but I was able to sit on a big container of flour and roll meatballs and do whatever I had to do to make my dad happy at his catering hall. And my Uncle Murray was kind of running the place, and they'd both inherited it from my great-grandma Rosie, who you just mentioned, who was one of the first women to really own a business in Newark, New Jersey back in the 40s and 50s. Women didn't really do that very often, but she was a tough lady, and she went on to play fullback for the Dallas Cowboys. She was quite something. But my Uncle Murray, he would tease me. He would just tease me about being the boss's son and this and that, and he made me cry. I didn't talk to him for a long time. I was probably 8, 9 years old. And over time, I realized he was just toughing me up. Mm-hmm. He was just getting me ready for real school and sports and karate, and then later on a career in comedy. And he was also hilarious. Mm-hmm. Like I have 2 cousins, and those were his granddaughters, and he would call them the looker and the cooker.
Oh my God!
I didn't know what roasting was as a kid. I thought everyone spoke like that. It wasn't until I went to college. And not many people in my family had actually gone off to college. But it wasn't until I traveled out of state up to Massachusetts to Boston University that I realized, my family's funny. I'm the least funny member, but I'm the funniest one at this school right now. And just playing poker with my buddies up there and stuff like that, they'd be setting me up. And I kind of got that I had this spark of something. I didn't even call it comedy. I didn't know what it was. It was a way to just sort of make friends
right,
and break tension. My dad passed away when I was like a sophomore, I think, and comedy, laughing about it, is the only thing that got my sister and I through it. Mm-hmm. I remember we were at my dad's funeral. I was 19, she was 17. My mom was already gone 5 years from leukemia. My dad had a cerebral hemorrhage brought on by coke, and this is the 80s, And suddenly we're orphaned as teenagers. It's a weird time to be orphaned. You don't think of yourself as an orphan when you're 19 and in college.
Right.
But I do remember, we call it a shiva, where people come over the house. And now we're living in this house. My dad started to make a little bit of money, as the catering hall started to do better. And we're now in Springfield, New Jersey, and our neighbors are a little fancier, and my sister I still kind of had this special bond, and the rabbi comes over to say a prayer, and we're in shock, we're in mourning. And when I had gone off to college, my sister got a little dog, and she named it Rossi, after my middle name, Ross. Rossi started mid-prayer during the saddest fucking moment of the night. Rossi starts like humping the rabbi's leg. And the rabbi is very concerned. Rabbi Korbman, he's trying to shake the dog off without interrupting his prayer. And my sister and I catch eyes and our heads fucking explode with laughter. And I realize like the power of breaking the tension, the power of comedy. You hear stories about people in war zones, people in Holocausts, using comedy to get through it. And I really do see that, and I really do empathize with that and gravitate towards those sorts of situations. Maybe that's why I loved being on stage during the pandemic when nobody else really was, because people were so starved for it. You saw the divorce rate was up, the suicide rate was up, the depression was up. So it almost felt like a USO mission going up in these little outdoor spots. And, you saw it in Yellow Springs last week, Talib. It's like people are going to put on a mask, a blanket, bundle up, 2 pair of socks, sit in the rain.
In the rain. I mean, in the pouring cats and dogs rain.
Right. To hear whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
To hear, they don't even know who's going to be there. Yeah. But the fact that people are coming from far and wide out in the cold to see comedy shows that it is more than just a laugh. It's therapy, it's cathartic, it's medicine. And the thing I love about those Dave shows is nobody wants their medicine watered down. Everybody wants their medicine potent.
That's right.
That's what's so good about Roast Battle, because even when you were doing the roast on your Instagram during pandemic, it was people that like, oh, I'm dying of cancer, I don't have many days left, roast me, before I die.
It's like, I don't know if other famous roasters went through this. Dean Martin, Don Rickles, like,
were they?
But my inbox on any given day is like literally people on their deathbed, or like, I just got COVID. I'm in the ICU. Could you write me a funny, message or make a video, or can I come on your live Insta and get roasted? And at this point, it's beyond a type of comedy. It's like a movement. Yeah. Like I woke up today with my whole feed was full of roast comments, but they were in Arabic. So like the roast battles are now in Saudi Arabia, and every few months a new country pops up, a new language pops up on my feed, and I feel like it's all coming right out of my world, right out of the Comedy Store. All the stuff we created in the belly room, Jazzy. Like money aside, I'll never be able to own it, but I give it. I love it. I love that people make it their own, and I love that I don't have to be greedy with it. I love that there's comics that are little kids right now that are going to be like, "Where's my roast battle?" And they're going to start their own roast battles at their school. Gilbert Gottfried is a good buddy of mine. His son Max is a little kid. He's in not even in high school yet, and he wrote a whole essay about roasting bullies at his school to diffuse them, to neutralize them.
That's dope.
So it really is something bigger than stand-up. It's bigger, it's become the fourth pillar. You got stand-up, improv, sketch, and now there's roast battle.
That's so ill. When you talked about the origins of that roast battle with the comics in the parking lot about to have that fight, it reminds me of the history of hip-hop, but more specific to comedy. A joke that Cedric the Entertainer does in Kings of Comedy when he's like, yeah, back in the days, when I was coming up, you had gangs, but they didn't fight. They breakdance fighting. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, that's kind of what happened with hip hop. People were fighting, and someone's like, yo, let's take it to the stage, sucker.
Yeah.
It's
almost a intellectual challenge when you take it from the fist to the mouth.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and you saw it with our forefathers. You see it in Hamilton.
Yeah.
Right? When you read books about Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, they were outwitting each other.
Yeah.
Winston Churchill, created peace by using his wit. He created his whole persona by using his quips. When he told that woman, tomorrow I'll be sober, but you'll still be an asshole or whatever.
Right.
There is something really powerful about, sadly sometimes you also saw it happen with Donald Trump in those debates. He was basically roast battling Hillary Clinton for the presidency.
That's right. That's exactly right. And when he went down the line and you're this little Marco and he gave everybody a name, that's exactly what that was.
Right. He was a bad roast battler. No matter how good a good roast battler would have done.
It showed you how devoid of soul politics is, though. That he could be so successful doing that. That the people he were against had nothing for him.
Right.
On that level. They couldn't be as petty as he could. Right. They couldn't be their truth or telling the truth. They were so bad at telling the truth, they had no pushback to his lie.
Correct. Yeah. And it always frustrated me because I did try to help. I did write a bunch of stuff, and Senator Franken at the time passed it on for me. And I understood what Hillary could have done and not writing insults, not writing roast jokes. I was yelling at the
fucking TV during those debates. I was like, yo, how you gonna let this man talk to you like this? You gotta get down.
They weren't used to
Here's my theory. All that, we go low.
Yeah.
When they go low, we go high. She got that from Michelle Obama.
Right.
Michelle Obama said that. Here's the thing. You're not fucking Michelle Obama.
Right.
You don't have the power, the cultural currency to go high.
And also,
as this man lies like this. You have to get down there and correct him.
Michelle Obama also was not running for president, and it's like, I feel like for her not saying anything, it's showing that he obviously wanted it more than her because she was not willing to pull her.
Hillary tried everything.
And get in there.
Her. What struck me about those debates, as far as you want to put it in terms of like what an insult contest, which is what you said, it really dropped down to. Sadly, he would say, "You should be in jail."
Yeah.
And she would look at him and turn to the camera and go, "My opponent believes," instead of going, "The fuck you talking about?"
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You should be in jail. Like, she never took on the challenge. And the feedback that I got back was that she didn't want to sound like the B word, a bitch.
A bitch?
And sometimes you need a bitch to stand up to a bully.
A bitch is going to be able to run the United States. No one always loves their boss. Like, at the end of the day, when people talk about, oh, that person's too harsh, at the end of the day, someone has to do it.
But I think, and this is not a defense.
I love my boss. Just kidding,
this is
guys.
This is not a defense of Hillary because that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to be the Hillary Clinton defender. She can do fine on her own. Or maybe she can't, which is why we're having this conversation.
Obviously, she cannot. Her kitten heels didn't get far.
But I saw a lot of sexism that I wasn't prepared for as a man to witness when Hillary was running. And I have my things I do not like about Hillary Clinton. I don't think she was a perfect candidate. In the hierarchy, I know how it works. It was her turn. Mm-hmm. But it was very hard for Hillary to be direct and be blunt because she was a woman.
Right.
When Tina Fey did that Bitch is the New Black, Tracy Morgan shut her down with that black whatever he came with next, because it was like, even with Tina Fey like stepping up for her like that, it still wasn't strong enough.
She was playing defense, not offense.
Yeah.
He was playing offense. We can break it down 100 ways, but in the end, I think that's what it was.
Well, you once said fake news will turn into fake history, but comedy will always tell the truth. The Trump roast was a classic.
Thanks, to
Absolutely. Trump was a fan of yours.
Yeah.
He invited you to Mar-a-Lago to perform.
Yeah.
You have an interesting story about what he said about Sarah Silverman. I don't know if we need to get into it on this show.
It's not it says more about him than anything else.
Yeah.
I'd known Trump from the Friars Club roasts, from charity events around New York. I was the funny wise ass and he was the rich real estate guy. So of course, I'm going to bump into this guy. And I saw a little bit of a lot of the guys I knew. Here's a rich guy in the hospitality business. I understand that business. I grew up in that business, in catering. And when you made fun of him back then, he was never the guy to crack up, but he'd appreciate a good joke. He had a sense of humor. He had a tinge of vulnerability. And he was a great target. Of course you want that guy at the roast.
Yeah.
You know, tabloid figure, crazy hair. You know, what did I say at his roast? Hair Force One, I called his plane.
Right.
I said, I read your book, Donald. How did it have 4 Chapter 11s? and I'd roasted him before, and it was okay. And then he called me afterwards. This is not on TV. And he offered me, like, I think it's like a long time ago, a lot of money, probably like 10 grand and, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I packed up my best preppy clothes, and I got my buddy Bruce Smirnoff to open for me because I knew they'd like him better than me. Uh-huh. Like, Trump had only really seen my roasting. He hadn't really seen my stand-up, which was quite different. And we went down there with him, and he did say, let's talk comedy. And I'm like, sure, Don, what do you want to know? He's like, Sarah Silverman, are her tits real? And I was like, ooh, terrible. That's like my sister, man.
Terrible.
And, I realized then that he was still just every other businessman, every other misogynistic bro kind of guy.
He was a symbol of wealth and decadence and sort of like the Robin Leach lifestyles that are rich and famous type of thing.
And you know what? People liked him back then. At the end of the day, Trump wants to be liked no matter what crap he says. So back then it was a lot easier for him to take a joke because he knew people liked to make fun of him and people like to laugh with him. Now no one likes him. So he doesn't want people to make jokes about him.
Well, I will say this. I won't say that we're in the post-Trump era because he still has a stranglehold on the Republican Party.
Sad.
They are now the Trump party. Mm-hmm. But now that his presidency is over, and particularly with the events that happened on January 6th, which I think any rational person knows that he
orchestrated.
Yeah, it's not orchestrated, definitely inspired, right? He is arguably your most famous fan. What's your stand on him now? Because he's still like such a polarizing public figure.
I struggle with this. Mm-hmm. I have been summoned a couple of times during his presidency for different reasons. Mm-hmm. So I guess I've seen him maybe 3 times while he was president. Each time was interesting. He knows I didn't support him. Mm-hmm. I'd always try to talk to him. Once I saw he was losing his sense of humor, I have a picture in my office of him looking at me in the Oval Office, a little angry, and me giving him a little like talking to. Mm-hmm. And people go, "What were you talking about in that moment?" I was basically busting his balls for canceling the White House Correspondents' Roast.
Yeah, after the Michelle Wolf thing.
And I did it in front of his national security team, who happened to be in the Oval Office, and I was there invited for lunch. I was there in town for the Mark Twain Prize that Dave got, and didn't expect to see the president, but I kept hearing like little chatter, boss would love to see him, boss would love to see him, and the next thing I know, I'm in the Oval Office and the entire and he comes down the hall like Darth Vader. So happy to see. He impeachment hearings were just starting. This is like 2 Octobers ago, and he just wants to have a light moment. Mm-hmm. So he says, "Hey Jeff, tell everybody how my roast was the highest rated roast in roast history,"
which is a light moment for Trump.
Trump is like Soulja Boy.
I said, "Yes, Mr. President, the highest rated roast in history after Flava Flav and Larry the Cable Guy." And I didn't want to be the court jester in the Oval Office. I didn't want to. It was a serious time with the impeachment going on, and so what I always do, and I don't know if it's I don't know why I do this, but rather than lecture him about criminal justice reform, which is why I was invited there another time, and things I really care about, I just took it back to him. Mm-hmm. And said, "What do you think Joan Rivers would think about what you're doing with certain policies? And do you miss Don Rickles?" I try to take him back to who he was and just remind him where he's from. Mm-hmm. And I did tell him and his team that I was really sad when he canceled the roast. It was the one time where he showed some vulnerability. He showed a sense of humor and humanity. And I said, this job and these people that you work with, if they had a little levity once a year or even once a day, something to make them laugh, to ease the tension in this job you have, not only would the world be a better place, but you would be, you'd have a better life here. Mm-hmm. You'd enjoy yourselves a little bit more. You have a lot of responsibility. So I'm trying to wrap it into a compliment with him because it's the only way he hears things. But I really did try to push him to not be so fucking serious. Mm-hmm. And I mean, who knows if I got through or not. He definitely was checking out my girlfriend and definitely went right back to his bro-y kind of wingman stuff. You know, hey, man, you know, like, how'd you get her? He's a good guy, you know? You're just all that stuff that anybody would do who owns a restaurant or a hotel, who's got a regular customer coming in, just trying to, you know, be a fun guy. It's all very complicated. To really answer your question, would I roast him again? I don't know. I think if the circumstances were where it was benefiting something I cared about, the troops or prison or criminal justice reform or something to do with the homeless, something where there's a greater good. We're raising $1 billion fucking dollars for something. Yeah, I would probably bite my tongue about a few things, and I would probably do it, and basically leverage my long friendship. Right. But if it was just like, come roast me for my ego, no. I think those days have passed.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
Yeah.
You and I share Dave as a friend. You have known Dave longer than I've known Dave. You started your career with Dave Chappelle. You were with Dave Chappelle on 9/11. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. I'd met Dave when he was still a teenager, floating around the comedy scene downtown in New York City. He never knew this. I just told this to him the other day. There was some hype on him. There was some buzz. He was like 17, 18, still in high school, and Mom had to drive him to the comedy clubs. We'd all heard it, you know. But suddenly, you know, he was in New York. And a lot of the cynical wise asses from the Boston Comedy Club on 3rd Street down the street said, Jeff, everybody trusts you. Go watch him. Go sneak into the Comedy Cellar where he's auditioning. Go watch him and find out if he's authentic. Find out if he's the real deal. So I go watch Dave. His jokes were like about like the Batmobile. You could look all these up. He had simple jokes, but you could tell it was really something.
Batmobile in the ghetto.
Yeah. Didn't we park right here, Batman? You know, and I watched him, and I forgot about those assholes back at the other club. I just stayed with Dave, and we became friends. I took him out. I don't know if it was that night or the next night, bought him his first beer at a nightclub on 14th Street that Artie Fuqua got us into.
Shout out to Artie.
Dave and I, you know, he's really too young to go anywhere. So we would drive around. I had a Jeep that my sister bought me with the money she collected from getting hit by a drunk driver. Wow. So I had this Jeep that I could, you know, basically become a comedian with, and I could pick up comics, drive them to gigs. You know, I wasn't even a headliner. I was still kind of a middle act, and Dave was sort of, you know, in between, not sure what he was yet. He never was an opener. He always kind of went right to middle to headliner quick. But we would drive around, and he loves to bring this up, the Fulton Fish Market back when it was on the east side. It would be all lit up. So we were like creatures of the night. So when we could drive around a place that was lit up the way the studio's lit up, we felt like we were having a day.
Right.
So we would just drive around and talk to people and write jokes, and we weren't up to anything really that interesting, but more like killing time and really just waiting for the next night when we could do our shows again. But he manned up pretty quick. He found Elaine, and before you could even spin your head, here he was like growing. Leaving all that behind, leaving the goofing off, the half-baked Dave behind a little bit. And now he was fully baked, but but not in a bad way. He was sort of ready for something more.
The last scene of that movie is, I like weed, but I like pussy way better. That's literally the last line of that movie.
That'll be his dying words, too, because he found Elaine, and They had a baby. And
me and Dave were hanging out at that time. That's when he was coming over to the studio because I met him in Washington Square Park area.
9/11 hits. Now I'm in New York I'm now bi-coastal. I got an apartment in LA, and I got my apartment on Mercer Street, 300 Mercer Street, New York, 5th floor. And I was supposed to fly out that afternoon on United back to LA. But I stayed an extra day to hang out and enjoy the nice weather and see some family. And Ralphie May, the late great Ralphie, calls me up.
Ralphie May.
Great guy. I miss him so fucking much. He calls me up. He's screaming into my answering machine, "Wake up, player, wake up, wake up." Because he knew I was supposed to fly out. He was worried about me. I was a head writer for Jamie Foxx for the MTV Movie Awards. Big job for me, and I was really enjoying being in New York, running this little writer's room for Jamie, not so little writer's room for Jamie, and Sully McCullough and Chris Spencer, a lot of funny, a lot of Jamie.
Shout out Chris Spencer.
Yeah, and being the goofy Jewish chubby white guy, I got they love to tear me apart. And I have to sort of organize everything. And Jamie murdered. I got to work with all these cool people and Mark Shaman. We did music. It was a real learning experience. And anyway, I didn't fly back with the crew. I flew back a couple days later. I was going to fly back 2 days later. And when Ralphie woke me up, I turned on the news, I saw the towers drop, and I basically threw on some sweatpants, and I went to the bank machine to get whatever you're allowed to take out, $300 back then. And I went to the deli knowing that people might start showing up at my house from downtown.
Yeah.
And I bought like 10 sandwiches. Just because I was like, what the fuck's happening? And if I get hungry...
I love that.
I need sandwiches.
He was like, I need sandwiches. What do I need? Sandwiches.
Yeah.
Were they pastrami?
I don't remember.
Right, the whole city's burning up. I need sandwiches.
I wanted to make sure I had food. And I got a bunch of sandwiches, and I was gone maybe half an hour. And I come back, and, woo, woo, woo. There's just sirens, sirens, sirens. It's a horror movie. You just see zombies walking up the fucking street.
Yeah, man.
And there's Dave and Elaine and the baby in a stroller, covered in, I guess it was human ash.
Yeah.
With these very blank looks on their faces. Something between best friend and refugee. Like, Jeff, what we were just seeing, and without really talking, we just kind of walked in and went upstairs, and they put Sully down and in the bed and put him to sleep, and we just sort of sat there. And of course, Dave starts slinging jokes.
Right. Of course.
Because we at that point we were so scared we didn't know what else to do besides make jokes.
Right.
Somewhere I have a picture of me and Dave up on the roof of 300 Mercer, with the towers smoking behind us.
Dave says that he went to Ohio shortly after that. It kind of drove him back to Ohio. He said he was really enjoying New York City, but at that point with the new baby, last time I seen you was in Ohio. Jeff, I think you're a ringer. I think you lied about your experience with skipping rocks.
He came here and said that. He said, you know what? Jeff's a liar. He said,
I said, Jeff's a liar.
He said he never skipped a rock before.
Yeah,
but
you said, I don't, what are we doing with skipping rock? How are you? I've never done this before. 8 skips. You came in second in a row, second place.
Yeah.
You got an actual award.
Yep.
You're like the Dominican kid on my Little League team with the mustache.
When my mom died, my dad needed a couple of summers off. He shipped my sister and I off to summer camp. And I honestly forgot that I'd done it. That I could remember. I hadn't done it.
He is a ringer.
Yeah.
I hadn't done it in
Right. It came back.
40 years.
Like gangbusters.
That's why I wouldn't go first. Donnell was like, all right, you're up. And I'm like, no.
And Donnell did the worst out of everybody.
Oh, and he was talking the most shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like dunking him. Like it didn't work at all. But you find the right rock. Now, one thing I did was that you didn't do, no one figured out to do, was you needed more space. So I was willing to get my feet wet, take 3 steps into the lake, and go down the lake instead of across the lake.
I had on some Air Maxes. I wasn't doing
You had nice sneakers. I purposely wore my shitty sneakers.
We're kayaking. We're in a river.
I saw it, and you don't have to rub it in.
Hey, we're going to go one day.
Thanks. Oh, I'm excited.
I'm so jealous. The pictures they're posting now.
Yeah,
Craig
me too.
Robinson's down there.
Yeah, Jessica
Tony
Kim
Woods.
Moore, Tony Woods, Lunel.
I'm dying. I'm so jealous. And why should I be jealous? I just came
You
back.
just did it, right? It's FOMO.
Great. That's how much fun it is.
Yeah.
Shout out to Dave Chappelle creating something special, and Elaine too, with their big giant brunches. And I'd never
A brunch where someone is rolling up joints, and all you got to do is tip them, and you can take as many as you want.
He seems very. He seemed very content.
Yeah.
He seemed really happy.
Yeah.
And that made me feel good. Like, sometimes comedians, we have these demons, we have this anxiety. He seemed really content, and that made me happy.
Yeah, shout out to Dave Chappelle.
Shout out to Dave, and not shout out to Jeff, who actually was supposed to have me over his house on Sunday and did not come back. But
I did stay
it's
an
all
extra
good.
day.
We had to kayak.
Yeah.
We had yakking to do.
Now, Talib is the only person, I think, who gets in his own kayak with his own boombox or whatever the fuck that thing is, that Bluetooth speaker thing. Yeah. So now he's DJing for snakes and crocodiles. It was like the most ghetto Brooklyn thing in the most un-Brooklyn environment.
But you know what's crazy? I had that big ass speaker because we booked all these people parties in a row, and I was like, I gotta work, but I want to be on the river. So I was listening to Terrace Martin. That's what I was doing. I was like in the kayak.
Oh, that's good.
That's the same thing he did on Miami trip. Talib does not stop working, ladies and gentlemen.
You're a method interviewer, is what you are. Like actors will dive into a role. What you do is you dive in. I've seen you do it on the plane, and I saw you do it just when I got here.
Yeah.
You listen to the music or you listen to the comedy, and I've listened to you talk to the other comics, Eric, Andre, Hannibal, and some others, and you go into their vaults. You go into their and you were doing that on the lake that day. That was impressive.
Yeah, I love it. I really am a fan of the interview process. Rest in peace to Reggie Osei, a young man named Combat Jack, who was like the first real hip-hop journalist in the podcast space. But before him, my inspiration was Gil Noble, who had a show called Like It Is on ABC. It was on for like 30 years. It was like on Sunday mornings at 6 or 7 a.m. or some, maybe 9 a.m. When everybody was in church, Like It Is was on. But also the show back in the days, This Is Your Life.
Of course.
Which I'm a little young for. I didn't grow up on that show.
Great show.
But I remember seeing the reruns and thinking, wow, that's a cool device.
Well, here's a question for you now. You open every people's party saying this is the best podcast.
Yes.
Now you have a second podcast.
All right now, Jeff.
Okay.
This is our sister podcast.
Okay, so which one's better?
See,
which one are you?
This is the world's best. People's Party is the world's best podcast.
Okay.
Midnight Miracle is the best podcast in the world.
That's how you do it, Talib. That is how you do it, ladies and gentlemen. But I will give Talib his flowers real quick, too, because I've learned so much watching you interview that now, like I said when we interviewed Pete Rock, I listen to the music, too, while I'm getting ready. Like I listened to Pete Rock radio while I did my sewing that's not a wig. And,
Are we going to talk about this hair on this episode?
You know what? We can talk about it whenever. But no, seriously, I love that because you get into the mindset of whoever we're interviewing so that when they get here, it's just like, you know them already.
Yeah, I love it. I do.
Well, it makes people feel good. And congrats on your book, Vibrate Higher, which I originally thought was about Jasmine's vibrator. I waited a week to tell that joke.
I'm glad you held it in.
I'm glad you did, too.
Now, I want to give a little bit of history on the Friars Club.
Great.
Before we go on. Founded in 1904 by Broadway agents and performers in an effort to stop ticket fraud. They wanted to stop people. People were like doing a ticket scam, and they all got together in a room and like, we got to stop this.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And then it turned into luncheons and dinners and tribute dinners. And then by the 50s, in 1950, the first roast they did was Joey Lewis and Sam Levinson. By the 60s, they started having the roast on television, Kraft Music Hall, Dean Martin Show. I remember being a kid, those late night commercials, like buy the DVD or for the Dean Martin roast.
Right.
And you see like Mom's Mabley and Red Skeleton.
And Orson Welles.
And
Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. And I remember me and Yassine Bey, after a show in Europe, stayed up all night. Remember they used to play them in a row late night?
Yeah.
Watching these commercials of these Dean Martin roast.
That's cool.
Yeah, man. It was always the type of thing where it's like, you wanted to be in that room. You didn't have access to it.
Right.
So you have comedians like Steve Allen, Bob Hope, Henny Youngman. You were obviously watching those roasts coming up, right?
No.
No, okay.
No. It's a weird thing, Talib, because when I first got asked to do the roasts were corny.
Stuffy, right?
It was coming off Ted Danson.
Oh, yeah, with the blackface.
Wearing blackface when he was in a relationship with Whoopi, with Whoopi Goldberg. And I adore Whoopi. And they couldn't get celebrities.
Shout out to Montel Williams, who told on everybody. He was a brand new member of the Friars Club. He was like, this is racist.
Obviously, tastes have changed, and nobody would do that now. And at the time, it probably, I can't speak for Whoopi, but a lot of people got scared. Maybe it might even be like that right now, again, just because we're in this like ridiculous woke culture. But at the time, in the late 90s, I was just a regular alt comic telling stories, not really sure what was going to happen, and doing my love poems and trying to be cute. And Greg Fitzsimmons, who's a buddy of mine, his dad, Bob Fitzsimmons, was a legendary New York broadcaster, radio guy. And they did a golf tournament every year after he passed away that Greg would produce out in Jersey. So the old guys would get together and play golf for charity. And it was a good mixed crowd. They'd have some sports figures, a couple Yankees, retired guys would be there. And, it's like I was honored to be asked to do something cool with the Friars Club, which I'd heard of but didn't know a lot about. And Freddie Roman, who's still around, old guy, gave me this terrible intro shitting all over me because I just dismissed me as some new guy no one would care about.
Right.
But, you got to go up there and prove yourself. So, of course, I'm like, I'm trained now.
From the clubs.
I've been doing not just the Comedy Cellar and the clubs in New York, but I've already been out to, the clubs in Newark. I've done the black rooms by now. I'd already followed Naughty by Nature at the Apollo at the Lou Rawls Parade of Stars. Nobody was going to.
Lou Rawls Parade of Stars.
If I could handle that, I wasn't going to let a bunch of retired Jewish guys come at me. Right. These are my people.
Right.
So I go, oh, Freddie Roman. I guess he's loud, boisterous. They call him Roman because you can hear him in Italy. Just some not taking it. Nothing terribly funny, but they showing some pushback, some teeth. And I did good. I did really well that night. Just spritzing around, making fun of these old guys at this golf tournament when they were drunk. And a month later, Jean-Pierre, the executive director of the New York Friars Club, calls me up and says, Mr. Ross, we saw you at the golf tournament, da-da-da-da-da. We're roasting Steven Seagal. Back then, they called them luncheons.
Right.
Roast was the verb. Roast was what you were doing, but we want to invite you to our celebrity luncheon, and which was like a way to bring in celebrities. Then they realized, it's a roast. And they'd get an award. It was for charity. There'd always be a bunch of veterans there, and you'd have somebody from the mayor's office. You'd have it was the first time I'd been invited somewhere to perform where it wasn't just other comics there. It was like all these sort of Abe Vigoda. And I didn't really know what the roasts were, so I had to go to the Museum of Broadcasting, which is still in New York, and I'd have to look up what you were talking about.
There were no YouTubes back then.
No YouTube. I would have to go to the museum, and I looked up the Dean Martin roast. I'd heard about him. I'd seen these guys on Johnny Carson when I was a kid, but I didn't really know their work. Like my parents, I heard Buddy Hackett's voice. I heard Don Rickles' voice. I hid at the top of the stairs. I could hear my parents laughing, but I didn't know what they looked like. I just sort of, it was more like I'm not a throwback. Like I'm kind of like they were me. These guys were like me. Like when I wound up meeting these guys, Henny Youngman, Buddy Hackett, Milton Berle, and they're the reason I did the roast, because I didn't give a shit about Steven Seagal.
Right.
But when I understood I could talk about these legends, Mount Roastmore, if you will.
Yeah.
I said, I could get with making some jokes on Henny Youngman and
Right.
Milton Berle. That would be something my parents would be
Which
proud
is interesting, because when I watched the later roast in Comedy Central, the fun part is not the main subject. The fun part is going at everybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
You saw us roast Pam Anderson. All the good jokes were about Courtney Love.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is it possible that Courtney Love looks worse than Kurt Cobain?
Jesus Christ.
It's like, you always want good targets at the roast. But it was really the fact that the roast had become antiquated. It was like, when I first started doing those roasts, Talib, it was like saying I was into jousting or Latin. It was a lost art.
Right. I'm a blacksmith.
Right. I had to go, if I couldn't take my jokes like I do now and read them at a comedy club, like now I can try them out anywhere. People know what roast battles and roasting. It's like, it's just a word you see on the news. Like this one roast this one about this. And,
right.
But back then it was like, oh, why is he being so mean about Drew Carey? So I had to make it. I had to explain to people what a roast was and then try out the jokes. It was a lot of heavy lifting or, laying pipe, as they say, exposition. I get out there. It's that first roast, and I have my one good suit on left from the Letterman show the year before or whatever it was, and Steven Seagal's wearing some, like Chinese tuxedo, like red velvet kind of thing that you'd see him wearing a movie or something.
Right.
And there's 1,800 people. I think Howard Stern was in the rafters, and a lot of you had all these, the police commissioner. Like it was, wow, this is so wild. And my opening joke, Milton Berle gave me this terrible introduction. You might have seen him at a convention. He's just back from a convention in Las Vegas for lesbians with dildo rash. Here's Jeff Ross. Just terrible. And Seagal's looking at me like he doesn't know who the fuck I am.
Right.
By the way, 3 guys have already bombed. You know what I mean? So it's like not great. And I looked at Seagal and I look out at the crowd and I kind of let them come to me a little bit instead of trying to impress everybody, right? And I just kind of took my time and I said, it's great to be here. A lot of you don't know me, but I feel uniquely qualified to be here today because I'm also a shitty actor. And you see Seagal kind of like, is he talking about? He's confused. And you see Berle kind of laughing.
Right.
And Burl's already like talking to his buddy. He's like, get a load of this fucking kid, right? So I keep going. I have like 12 pages of like the Unabomber manifesto here. I've been working for a month, right? And every third or fourth joke worked. Not every joke worked, but every third or fourth joke worked. And every time I got a big laugh, Milton Berle would pop me in the ribs from behind the podium. He's sitting right next to me. No one could see it, but I felt it. And I was like, what the fuck's... The only person ever did that to me was my cantor during my bar mitzvah haftorah, like to make me less nervous.
Right.
And finally, every time I get a big laugh, he'd hit me. And I don't know if he's trying to tell me to get off. I don't know what he's doing. But finally, I stopped and I started engaging him. Now it's this little pisher, Jeff Ross, and Milton Berle, the Friars Club president.
A legend.
The best. Yeah. And we go back and forth.
Uncle Milty,
right. Famous for having the biggest cock in show business. And we go back and forth. I'm kind of holding my own. And finally, Buddy Hackett is like 15 yards down the dais. Back then, it was like a jet. Like the dais was 100 people on it. And Buddy goes, "Hey, Milton, let the kid work. Remember when you used to?" Oh. And boom, the crowd is like on my side. Milton goes running down the dais, kisses Buddy on the lips. And I go, look at
mob shit.
Yeah. And I make a joke. Look at the two of them. Between the two of them, they have 100 years of homosexual experience. Some nonsense joke just to break the tension and get me out of it. I go back to the Friars Club afterwards, and I'd only been there a couple times to play cards. And Buddy is in one room for the drinkers, and Milton's in another room for the smokers. And Buddy is telling me like, "Oh yeah, Milton, he does that. He gets jealous and this and that and meh. And and Buddy and I became friends that night for the rest of his life. But then I go into the smokers' room and I go, "Milton, why would you, what was the, why would you poke me, or any advice? I probably just said, any advice for me to do this next time. And without much hesitation, he said, they only remember the home runs. I guess he was telling me basically to edit.
Right.
Like, you had some home runs, keep it to the home runs.
Dave calls them select cuts when we're editing the podcast. Just keep the select cuts.
Select cuts.
Yeah.
Here it is. Decades later, people remember some of those jokes, the select cuts.
Yeah.
I'd found my Yankee Stadium that day. That is when I realized that this is something that I was good at. That's when I started getting more involved in the roasts and producing them, and getting involved in the politics of the Friars Club, so that more people, and of course, like anything else, the old guard would resist, keep it private, this and that.
Right. They didn't want women in at first.
Right. So
Haters.
what I did was I kept all the old guys in the shows.
Yeah. Smart.
You kind of already answered part of my question, but I still wanted to highlight something that Buddy Hackett said. And he said, everyone has one night where they are the funniest comedian. And what does that quote mean to you?
I asked Buddy that question. That's where that comes from. I said, Buddy, when you were in your prime, who was the funniest comic? And his answer probably saved my life. Because it gave me hope, inspiration, and I'm sure I asked it in a moment of doubt with my own career. He basically said, everybody's the funniest person for a while. Everybody has those moments where everyone points to that person and goes, did you see the new Bo Burnham special? I haven't seen it, but everyone's talking about it. He's probably the funniest guy this week. And then maybe next month it'll be somebody else. And once you get that once you get a taste of that, you're kind of made.
Yeah.
And it made me go, oh, I just need to find some lane. And I struggled with the roasts because the roast started to take off. And now it's like, they were still kind of like, the cooler kids were like, what are you doing? Putting on a fucking suit and going hanging out with the old guys. And I was like, yeah. And I started to get pigeonholed as the roast guy, which I wasn't smart enough to know that was a good thing. I was like, oh boy, now I'm like stuck in this one thing and no one will ever see me as anything else. And I so appreciated your intro that sort of opened that up a little bit. And I spoke to Dave about it. We were having a late night breakfast in Vegas after some comedy festival. And Dave said, take that lane and make it a highway.
Yeah.
You found your lane. Don't deny it.
Yep.
Don't be embarrassed by it.
Yeah.
But make that something that you're proud of. And that's when I stopped waiting around for celebrities to go roast me and started making it about my fans and going, who wants to come up here? Volunteers only. And I started lining them up and speed roasting people. Then I started doing, all right, let me roast the incarcerated and give them some comic relief. Let me go to the border and roast migrants as they cross through. Let me do the roast battles where a new generation can get into it. Let me roast history on Netflix where we roast, like you say, Abe Lincoln, Anne Frank, Ali, people I really genuinely are my heroes. Let me, you always get that question, like if you could have dinner with anybody. So that's kind of what I answer there is like, why just roast Alec Baldwin because he's ready? Let me roast whatever I want to make. Let me make the roast something else that Dean Martin didn't think of.
Yeah.
He could sing. I can't. I'm going to have to keep roasting.
Right.
But it's crazy that when you find your lane, you're like, oh my God, I don't want to be this one person. When every comedian, like your first, what they say, 10 years, I'm at 6 years, so I'm still in this process, but you're trying to figure out what makes you special. What is your niche? And you found that.
And that took a while. Those early years, I wasn't lost, but it was like I wasn't getting on Letterman. It took a while to really find something that would pop. And sometimes it's just kind of trying a bunch of shit. Trying different things and seeing what works. And I definitely did things that didn't work to get there.
I like what you had to say, though, about not picking someone that someone else points at because that's bullying. you only pick people who volunteer for it.
Right.
I think that's very altruistic.
Thank you. Also necessity, because the times I haven't done that, I learned the hard way. Roasting is all about consent. Mm-hmm. It's just not fun when they're not in on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and I roasted Richard Branson, billionaire. Mm-hmm. Got hired, flew me to Toronto. Man, when I'm telling you method research, method roasting, I read this guy's book. I interviewed his friends. I worked probably 3 weeks on this roast for Richard Branson because I wanted to do well. I wanted to make him proud. Mm-hmm. I said to his friends, well, he knows I'm doing this, right? And they said, no, he's a prankster, and we're going to surprise him for his birthday.
Oh, wow.
You sure? Mm-hmm. And I get up there, and I got my material, and it's fire, and it's really good. And he's not enjoying it. The crowd's laughing because he's a little squirming in his seat and a little uncomfortable and the wincing. And that's I'm really well researched. I'm not doing jokes I'm not like cut and pasting some billionaire jokes. Like I'm roasting this guy, creator of Virgin Records, Virgin Atlantic, you know, everything he's done for the environment, these giant businesses, the way he looks, all of it. I read his fucking autobiography.
Right.
And he hates it. Mm. And now the crowd's like not laughing as much, and I'm kind of funny, so some people are laughing. But
he's like Trump in front of Michelle Wolf,
pretty much.
And my set ends, whatever it is, 10, 15 minutes, and he gets up, and he goes to give me a hug, and he pours his drink on my head.
Whoa!
Did you have hair or not?
I did. I had a full mop of curly Jufro.
Oh. That's like some real billionaire bullshit. Like pour a drink on someone's head?
It was...
The fuck?
Did you...
block that one?
I wasn't in a position to be a bad sport. Mm-hmm. I just roasted him. I was getting paid. I was a gig. He's a powerful guy that, as the great Mal Z. Lawrence would say, he probably had enough money in his left pocket to have me killed.
Yeah.
So I took it. Mm-hmm. But I went out one way and he went out another. It wasn't cool.
Yeah.
And I realized then that you can't, first of all, you can't bum rush anyone, let alone powerful people. Mm-hmm. They get very put off by that. And I made a rule. I only roast people that volunteer.
Now, before I could go to a comedy club, I used to watch BET Comic View. And BET Comic View was like black comics doing the Chitlin circuit, and they finally made it to BET. And D.L. Hewley was killing it to the point where he even became a host of that show. Right. And back then, his secret weapon was his crowd work, is what they call it, where he's doing exactly what you said you'll never do, where you're just, hey, you're funny looking, and you just start going in on people in the crowd. And on BET Comic View, that became like the way that you excelled. That's the way, the better your crowd work was. Huh. So that's like sort of opposite. But you said you worked in black rooms and how that toughened you up.
I didn't want to interrupt your question, but
all good.
It's a little bit like, there's a little bit of, you're in the front row at a DL Comic View taping. You're in the front row at a Don Rickles show in Vegas. You're kind of volunteering.
Once you go, because you already know, okay, I get it. So, like you're going into that knowing that's the experience that you're going to get.
What I won't do is take the mic, walk out 15 rows to the back, pull a guy out of a handicap section and go, hey, look at this fucking guy. Or pull out a guy at a date, or a woman, who's like, no, that I won't do.
Yeah, and DL now, he doesn't do that anymore.
But, like you said, people do volunteer for it because I produce my own shows as well. And so I have to seat people a lot of times. And I started working out as a comedy club before I was a comic. And people specifically say, I'm not getting in the front. I don't want to be talked about. So like the people, and then some people come and be like, I want to be right there.
Yeah. You're right. People have that type of relationship with comedy clubs, especially people who are going on dates. It's a tough place to go on a first date.
I have my theory about that. I don't know if you and I talked about this in Yellow Springs or not, but I definitely went on this rant about comics not being a buzzkill, a cockblock. Like, when you come see my show, it's kind of like a music show. Mm-hmm. I want if you're coming with you're asking a guy out, or you're asking a woman out, or you're on your first date, second date, third date, whatever it is, anniversary. I don't talk about divorce. I don't talk about sexually transmitted diseases. I talk about fucking and music and like I want to be the icebreaker. I want to be your wingman.
Right.
I don't know if I get.
You're like Trump.
No.
I think I get it from Buddy Hackett. Buddy Hackett was my favorite, and he would just talk about sex, and he would make suggestive jokes. He was way too dirty for his time, and I want people to come back a year later and go, best first date I ever had. She's pregnant now. We're having a kid.
Yeah.
Like that. That's what really gets me. I feel like we are the wingmen, wing women of the world. The comics.
That's right.
You come to a comedy club. You don't want to leave there. On Valentine's Day, a million years ago, I took my girlfriend to see a David Mamet play because I thought that would be a cool thing to do. And this was pre-Google, so you didn't know what the fuck it was other than David. And it was a play about workplace sexual harassment on Valentine's Day. So we just left there like arguing over these nuances for a long time. And it was like this, we were smart enough and together enough to laugh about it, but I could see a lot of couples going, this was not a great choice.
Do you know Open Mike Eagle?
I don't know him, no.
He's a rapper he's sort of like comedian as well.
I heard you talk about him with Hannibal.
Yeah, he's Hannibal's friend.
Yeah.
But he has a song on his new album called A Black Mirror Episode Broke Up My Marriage is the name of the song.
My girlfriend right now, we're watching Handmaid's Tale.
Oh,
What?
I love it. I read the book and everything.
Certain things you kind of should be happy if it breaks you up, because if you're getting broken up at a comedy show, it wasn't going to last anyway.
Correct.
So, it's better to know now.
Yeah.
I like Handmaid's Tale. That's fun. That's a good time.
Is it fun?
The joke I've been saying.
It's a good time.
The joke I've been saying is it turns her on, and
She's a different breed.
I'm like, so I look up the show and I start watching. It's about Elizabeth Moss plays a woman who gets kidnapped and brought into sexual servitude and stripped of her dignity, and I'm like, this turns you on? She goes, yeah, I want to play Handmaid's Tale in the bedroom. I go, oh, really? Okay. What do I have to do? She's like, well, put on this white bonnet and red dress.
I love her.
That's a good one. The joke that you made at the Jerry Stiller roast about Bea Arthur as Sandra Bernhard, you said that's the one that really changed your life.
Yeah.
Can you share it with us?
That's when the roast went pop culture again. They were completely rebranded as something between what Dean Martin did in the 60s and 70s or whatever, and roller derby or something. Like, it was over the top. I'm still a young man, awestruck, and now I'm in a place where I'm helping produce these roasts, and for me that meant kind of being in on the bookings, but more about helping everybody with their speeches. Like, back then, my brain was so agile. I could write everybody's parts and not have repeat jokes. And of course, everybody would punch them up and make them their own. But like, I could give everybody who said yes something to do.
Right.
And if it was an impressionist, I could write that. If it was, didn't matter if you were Black, Chinese, Puerto Rican, like I could figure out your voice and make it work for you where you didn't sound like me or anybody else
black
on
voice.
the show.
No, but Jeff is not right in black voice, actually.
Black comedians will always want to come in with their own shit.
Right.
And, but in this particular case, Bea Arthur is a guest, but she's not speaking. Because that's how the roasts were. The dais was, like I said earlier, was so long. You'd have just friends who were celebrities, and Freddie Roman, as the head of the Friars, would go up, or maybe for a while it was Larry King. They would go up and they would introduce all these different. Patty Hearst would be there, and the Bernie Carrick, the police commissioner, and I'd have a joke for everybody.
Right.
The police commissioner's here. If you don't recognize Bernie Carrick, Bernie, raise your plunger so we all know who you are.
Jesus Christ.
So you can Google that.
Yeah.
But,
Abner Louima reference.
right. It was a no holds barred situation. And this was the early days of the Comedy Central airing the roasts. And I knew already what would be a holy shit moment. You know, like you got Bea Arthur there. She's not speaking, but I worship this woman.
Mm-hmm. Golden Girls. And everything she did before that, Maude
and All in the Family.
All in the Family. That's right.
And she was fucking hilarious. Mm-hmm. So it felt disrespectful not to acknowledge her. Mm-hmm. If she's going to be sitting there for 2 hours and she's all made up and she looks gorgeous and it's like she needs a moment.
Right.
And when it's on TV. So, you know, I'd always go on towards the end and, you know, I'm fidgeting and, you know, somebody does something similar, doesn't work, I'll scratch it off. And I keep looking down at B and I don't know what the joke's going to be, but I write in the margin of my script. There was no prompter back then. I had a script that I'd go up and read. And I just wrote Bea Arthur's dick. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what I'm thinking.
Right.
I don't know how I could write something so mean about someone I love so much. And sitting next to me is Ambassador Joe Zapala, the ambassador to Spain, who's a friar and a friend of mine. And I just push my paper over and I show him Bea Arthur's dick. And he looks at me and he goes, "Don't do that." I forgot about this part of it. And I just kind of forget about it. All right, you're right. I probably shouldn't. I got great stuff. What do I need to take a risk like that and piss her off? And, you know, it's Jerry Stiller's roast and Ann Mira, his wife, and Ben Stiller and Janine Garofalo. They're all there. And I go up and I'm going through, you know, each comic comes up and Sandra Bernhard's on right before me. I love Sandra Bernhard. I think today's her birthday.
Oh, shout out to Sandra.
She's a very talented woman, very down-to-earth person. And she wanted to do something different. So she sang with a band. She sang Magic Man, changed the words about Jerry to make him about Jerry. And Jerry is a very conservative, even though it's a Friars roast. First of all, you have to know that him being roasted by the Friars is his equivalent of getting an Oscar.
Right.
His eyes welled up the whole night. This was for basically a comic coming up through New York. This was the greatest honor he could get. He was already an old man. He'd already been on Seinfeld. Now he was on Kevin James's show or something like that. And he was very moved by the whole thing. Ben Stiller was there. His son, that was the first time they were kind of doing anything together. And Sandra makes him squirm and wince, and she's basically giving him a lap dance, sitting on the edge of the chair on his lap, singing to him, hugging him. It's awkward and hilarious. But definitely opening herself up.
Yeah, to the dick.
You know, and I go up next, and I had all these great opening jokes. I just skip it all. And I go, Sandra Bernhard, holy shit, I wouldn't fuck you with Bea Arthur's dick. And let's face it, the joke's okay.
Right.
But her reaction, she is such a champ. She does a slow roll evil eye, like into the camera. You know, she sees the Jumbotron, the 2,000 people, so they have it up on the monitors. She makes the joke funnier just by acting mad.
It's like an alley-oop.
Yeah, right. And she stunks it. So she takes my triple and makes it a grand slam. And now they got her on the close-up, and she's just leering like a Golden Girls moment. And I remember not really understanding, because it's so much happening, and I'm producing a show, and I'm starting to, you know, there's a lot going on, and you know, you see the reviews the next day, that joke gets quoted a lot, and then the end of the year rolls around, and Time Out New York has it as like comedy moments of the year and this and that. Another 6, 7, 8 months goes by. Every time I do morning radio or an interview, this comes up, and I'm like, wow, this is kind of becoming my calling card, this fucking Bea Arthur's dick joke. People are sending me Bea Arthur's photos, and Jimmy Kimmel sent me a painting of her, and a sexy painting of her in a leather S&M outfit and all that. And I start to realize, if I'm hearing about this joke this much, it's like having a verse in a song that's like pops for some reason.
It's your hook.
Yeah.
It's like having a good hook that
and I'd never had that before.
Yeah.
So I realized that if I'm hearing about it, Bea Arthur must be hearing about it. So months and months, maybe even a year or two goes by, and I see that she's in L.A. performing her one-person show at a little theater. And I went and I bought a ticket. The last ticket, one ticket. It's all I could afford, whatever it was. And I brought flowers. I brought a bouquet of flowers. I was like, I need to make sure that this is okay. If I'm going to keep talking about her in all these interviews and people are going to keep bringing it up, I want to make sure that she's not hating on it or scared of it. So I purposely get on last so that I can have a moment to talk to her. And I have my flowers and I'm trying to dress, nice and, be respectful. And, Miss Arthur, my name's Jeff. I don't know if you remember me, but we met at Jerry's roast. And she goes like this. She goes, "You nailed me, you prick." And I gave her the flowers and, she played it close to the vest. I'm not really sure how she felt about it. And then years later, she showed up at another roast that I produced that I invited her to. Mm-hmm. I think it was the Pam Anderson roast. So I knew that she was a good sport, and a great woman.
That's dope.
She might be a person that just likes the attention, because me personally, when I do roast battles, I wear stuff specifically so that the judges will have something to roast about, rather than people that just try and come all plain and it's like, oh, don't say anything to me, I just want to do my battle. It makes it I'd rather have a good performance so that everyone's talking about the good performance, so that she's one of those people.
People go, "Jeff, why do you dress like Gaddafi at the roast? Why do you wear cornrows?" I go, "So they don't make fun of how fat and ugly I am." I give them a decoy, a distraction, a diversion. It's part of like the roast jujitsu.
All right. So, Jeff, you're out. Post pandemic, I literally saw you every single night at the Comedy Store or wherever you were at.
Yeah.
You describe hitting comedy clubs as hitting the gym. And could you explain to the people how important spots like the Comedy Cellar, the Comedy Store, Boston Comedy Club are keeping the art form alive? And where do you think the best comedy clubs are today?
I think anywhere where it feels like a safe haven, where the comics come first, where camera phones come second.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're more important than ever, because for a while it looked like everything was going to go to YouTube and amateurs could really pop and you didn't need a big network backing, and Twitter was a lot of fun in the beginning for jokes. They all became bad crowds, unsafe spaces, if you will.
Yeah.
But comedy clubs, I think of them as a temple of free speech. Every now and then somebody slips up and the moment goes viral, and that is what it is. But for the most part, it is like doing reps. Craig Robinson dragging me out during the pandemic to do spots. Now it's 6 months later. Mm-hmm. I'm 6 months ahead of my colleagues.
Yes, you are.
I have an act. Even since I saw you in Yellow Springs, I've done 5, 6, 7 sets. So a joke that was clunky a week ago is now working.
Right.
And to me, it is like, obviously like hitting the gym. What the fuck do I know? I got a big belly, but it's like... Even when I do a set and I go, I don't know if I even tried anything different. I always try to, I don't even write down the jokes I'm doing. I want them to come out different every time until I hit and go, that felt right. Let me go back and listen to that. And they carve, they develop, they mold into something that you don't even know what, some stupid little pun could become a 12-minute essay, if you keep at it. And Chris Rock taught me this, like, think of things you want to talk about and then write jokes about that, as opposed to just trying to think of anything that's funny. So I'm trying to be a little bit more thoughtful in my stand-up about things I want to talk about, being a little bit more personal, because the roasts are very not personal. They're really about my guest of honor or the person in front of me. So I'm trying to talk a little bit more about my personal life, just because it feels like I'm not doing any jokes from before the pandemic.
Right.
If I do an old joke, it's because someone said, please do that one-liner about this and that. But
it's a different world.
For the most part, I'm just going, let me come out fresh, keep my audience surprised, and see where that leads me. I'm doing stand-up again as a hobby for the first time in decades.
Wow.
Doing it for fun.
You needed a refresher. Like, the pandemic for so many people was a time to, like, really take a rest, to find the love in your crafts. And I will say, I mean, I already thought you were hilarious before, but I just went to your show, and nothing against those comics, but it was clear who had been able to be working out their material and who was just getting on stage. All of us are going to be rusty because, typically we get up every night, but you shined because you've been working on your craft.
Word.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned Chris Rock. You've toured with Chris Rock. You have a long friendship with Chris Rock. Roasting in black communities called Playing the Dozens.
Yeah.
You're able to roast black people better than most comics. I feel like it's harder for white comedians to roast black people, but you do it without coming across as racist. Somehow. You did this beautifully at the Shaq All-Star thing with Emmitt Smith. How do you do that?
Well, this might not be the politically correct thing to say, but when I'm up there, I don't judge people. And black isn't a race. It's just becomes, if I'm talking to an Asian person, I'm Asian. If I'm talking to an old married couple, I'm an old married guy. If I'm talking to a black person, a black woman, I'm their friend. And I'm not even sure I'm that cognizant of what's happening. Growing up in Newark and then seeing the world from that brick city perspective, I always felt like even in high school, I was friends with everybody. The nerds, the cool kids, black, white, Chinese. Didn't even occur to me that they were different. They just looked different, but they weren't different. And to answer your question, I don't know if I've ever analyzed it. I'm afraid to sometimes. You know how you hear comics go, I don't want to see a shrink because then I won't be funny anymore if I'm cured. I don't think it's that extreme, but I think part of it is I've evolved. I don't go off least common denominator stuff as much as I maybe did earlier in the roasting. Like, you see a really dark guy from a country I've never heard of. It's easy to go, oh, look who invited the Somali boat pirate. And chances are he's going to laugh because he's a good sport and he said, please roast me. And then he has a quick, easy, digestible joke that he can go back and tell his friends. And most of the time that'll work. But part of it is not seeing the person as black or white or whatever it is, but listening and let them tell you who they are. So if I look at Jasmin and I go, oh, there's a black lady with blonde hair, I can make that joke. But if I hold that joke or don't tell that joke and let Jasmin, hey, where you from? Who you here with tonight? I like your hair. Where'd you get that done? Let her start it.
Yeah.
Then she's giving me the ammo. She's setting up the joke.
I saw you do that in Yellow Springs when you brought people up, and certain people were easier targets from how they behaved, but the last guy was this black guy. And I saw you trying to get in. How do I get in? And you're like, and you got him, you started asking the questions. Okay, well, let me ask you, where are you from? And he said he had a practice. He had some sort of practice. And you were like, oh, here in Yellow Springs? And he's like, no, I'm in Columbus. You're like, okay, Mr. Fancy Pants. Slow down, Mr. Fancy Pants. And when you said that, I was sitting next to Dave.
Yeah.
I said, wow, that was quick and that was good. And he said, yeah, Jeff is that guy. He said, Jeff doesn't even understand the area, the region that well to even understand how funny that joke actually is.
Part of it is just intuitive and instinct, and I try not to analyze it and just try to be, I don't want to talk about punching down or punching up, but it's like, all of it is, if you're saying roast me, I want everyone to leave the show going, that was so much fun. I want to do that again.
Yeah.
And backhanded compliments go a long way. The only time people really would get mad is it's when they go up there with an agenda.
Yeah.
Like when I wasn't as good at the speed roasting of my fans as I am now, I'm not as experienced, I should say. Like, I remember Vegas. Who wants to come up here? Inevitably, high heels, safari dress, tits hanging out.
Safari dress.
Hair all done.
That's the formula for
right? Like
Vegas.
they come up and they go, oh my God, I'm going to go up there, and the boobs are all out. And
Safari dress.
And if I take that person's hand and bring him center stage to roast him and ignore
the big ass titties
and just make fun of crooked teeth, I'm gonna get smacked. Like, so I also have to be a little aware of why people are up there and why they want to be center of attention too.
Right.
I think that because you're a people person, that's why you're so good at roasting, because typically in roast battle, people will go for just the racist joke or just the crippled joke. When it's like, when you go for someone's personality, they feel like you tried to learn them. And that in tune makes everybody else laugh, because it doesn't, then when people say, you see color, but then you literally don't see the color or the race or the nationality. You just see everybody as people up there enjoying themselves. And that's what makes it such a fun experience.
I think what triggered it for me is going into Brazos County Jail. I had the real problem with that show was, now I'm going to line up all these people, and I can't make fun of their outfit because they're all wearing the same outfit. They're all wearing orange jumpsuits. And I can't make fun of their crimes because I'm not going to ask them their crimes. I went into it knowing this is going to be harder because they're going to have to give me something. They're going to have to tell me something about themselves. And I'm not going to prejudge them. And I don't know if someone's a violent criminal. I don't know if somebody's in there because they didn't pay their child support. I don't know what it is. So when I learned that I had to be a little bit more patient and not just slag on people. Like, look at this fat guy, look at this black guy, look at this Mexican guy with the teardrop. Like, prejudging. Literally, I couldn't judge them. And if they want to tell me what they're in for, or they want to tell me where they're from, in essence, they're giving me the setups, and I'm hitting the punchlines.
Yeah.
All right, so at the Emmitt Smith roast, Jamie Foxx famously ethered Doug Williams, sarcastic laughing, role-playing at his conscience, and Jamie tried to cut into your set as well. Can you take us into that room and tell us how you perceived it during that time?
Not without an attorney.
My mom got you. Go ahead.
This is 2001, pre-9/11, 2001, right? Summer 2001. Now I've gotten a reputation as the roast guy in the comedy business. And Shaq writes a letter to my team and says, we're doing a thing for my children's charity in Vegas.
That man loves his comedy.
Whew. And he's funny. Like,
he's funny, yeah.
I was like, oh, wow, I got to do this. But my only hook is that I'm the honky.
Right.
So I write back.
That's an old school 70s term, like Jefferson's.
Right. I'm the only white guy on the dais. I basically write him back. I go, I'm in, but you can't book any more white guys. I want to be the white guy in the room.
Right.
So then the Tory brothers are there, and Jamie Foxx is hosting, and there's a couple of retired players and current players, and I'm nervous because I'm out of my Friars Club environment now, and I'm in the sports world, and I'm in Vegas, and I don't really know these guys as well. And we had a little walkthrough rehearsal, and I said to Shaq, like, I meet Shaq, and his arm he goes to shake my hand while I'm saying hi to him. So my head is looking straight up. And he's like, you gonna leave me hanging, dog? I had to lower my head to see that. In other words, his hand and eyes are so far from each other that I can't see both at the same time. Hilarious. Oh, sorry, Shaq.
I like that you got a Buddy Hackett and you got a Shaq.
Yeah. and I go, but meeting Buddy Hackett was the best. Elevator of the Friars Club. He gets on. Mr. Hackett, my name's Jeff Ross. I'm a comedian. If my parents knew I was meeting you, they'd be so proud. He goes, you know who hates farts the most? Midgets. And then he gets off the elevator. But anyway. I go, Shaq, I got a lot of really provocative jokes here. And, I'm going to go hard. You think, I was really asking him, but I said, do you think Emmitt will be okay with this? And he goes, man, nobody ever asked me to hold back on a basketball court. I would never ask you to hold back on your field. And I was like, wow. No one ever spoke to me like that about roasting. I was like, that's what a fucking champion is.
That's right.
It had a smack talk element. It was on pay-per-view. It wasn't produced tight the way the Comedy Central roasts were. A little wilder. Moose Johnson had just retired, and he brought out a big giant book and read a 20-minute speech that wasn't funny. So it was like already a little weird, and him and Jamie had gotten into sort of a back and forth similar. And Jamie made a joke about, Moose or something and being boring, and Moose literally threw a chair at Jamie, pushed a chair. This is all cut out of the show. And, and I don't know if people know about this part, but it's like...
It's not a party till someone throws a chair.
So there was already a lot of tension in the room. Then this guy, Doug, goes on, and no one really knew him. Nice guy. And he made a couple of rookie roast mistakes. He started going after the most beloved person in the room, even beyond Emmitt Smith, was Jamie. Because here's Jamie's hosting. He's already I think he had just done the Ali movie.
Yeah.
He's a big TV star. But in our little comedy world, he's like the host. He was prepared, had a tux on, and he starts going after Jamie and his money. It's just like, it's not really about Jamie and his money, and the jokes weren't funny, and he keeps digging in, and he let the audience see him sweat a little bit. And Jamie's doing what he's supposed to do. If Milton Berle was hosting that roast, he would have done the same goddamn thing.
Right.
He would have kept it going. This guy's bombing, Jamie's saving it. This guy's bombing more, Jamie's saving it. And now the guy doesn't know when to get the fuck off stage.
And that's where the consciousness shit.
Jamie starts grabbing his lapel mic. Because he's off stage now. He's like, this is your conscience. Another joke didn't work. So now he's turning this guy inside out. And it's somewhere between a schoolyard and a Super Bowl. It's like the stakes are high, but it's also kind of comedically primitive.
Yeah.
You're just making fun of the nerd who's not funny when we're all being funny. And funny wins.
Yeah.
And these roasts are cutthroat.
Well, you said that roast is the Super Bowl of comedy.
Yeah.
We were with Bob Saget the other day, and as he's playing a guitar, he says a musical comedy is the worst form. Chappelle said sarcasm is the worst form.
Right.
But, I understand that logic of the roast. Pat Cooper in that documentary she was talking about said it was a championship fight of comedy, the roast.
Sure.
You took this act on the road to Afghanistan and to all these war zones, working with the USO. You made a film about this.
Yeah.
Documentary won awards, Patriot Act.
Yeah.
We have a friend in Moammer.
Yeah.
He also travels to talk to the troops, and it's interesting because he's a Palestinian guy, you're a Jewish guy.
Right.
You guys both do this together.
Yep.
I know you don't always support the reasons we go to these wars.
Right.
But you still put yourself in a position to entertain the troops who you feel are risking their lives.
Right.
How do you deal with those feelings of not supporting some of these imperialistic causes, but still wanting to support the troops?
In the beginning, I didn't know there was a difference. I was going, my mentor and best friend, Buddy Hackett, had died suddenly in the summer of 2003, and I was lost. I was probably in a low point in my career, in my personal life, looking for a greater meaning than how much, free booze do I get at the gig, and did they spell my name right, and how much am I making? It was sort of like, is this really it? Comedy clubs. And Bob Hope died shortly after that, and I didn't care about Bob Hope. His comedy didn't speak to me. He was 100 years old. And I see on the cover of the New York Times, I'm sitting in Washington Square Park drinking my coffee, and I see this picture of Bob Hope with his medal that he was the only civilian ever given a Medal of Honor by the Commander-in-Chief. And I read a little bit more, and I see that he's done like 100 trips from World War II up into the Gulf War. And I didn't know his politics. I just assumed he was an old, rich, conservative guy. But I showed it to my mailman, black guy, Vietnam vet. Said, look at this guy. Look at this is a comedian on the cover of the New York Times. And we would just bullshit, And he got all, he got all emotional. He's like, man, I was in Vietnam and Bob Hope came over and he didn't need to come over. And he gave me a whole speech about Bob Hope. And now I'm like, fuck, wow, that's really something. And I go out to LA and I'm at the Improv on Melrose, and Kathy Kinney, played Mimi on the Drew Carey shows there. And she goes, she's happy to see me. I did Punch Up and stuff on that show years earlier. She goes, Drew's inside. He's looking for comics to go to Iraq with us. And I'm 2 beers in, and I see Drew, and I don't know if I said anything or he said something, but he was happy to see me. And, you know, he says, we're going to Iraq. We're leaving in a month. It's the early days of the U.S. occupation. I never called it a war. I called it the occupation. And sure, Drew's like a great guy. He's a former Marine. And I respected him as an entertainer. And it sounded like a cool adventure. So I go, yeah. And I wake up the next morning sober, and I go, what the fuck did I agree to?
Wait, you were drunk after 2 beers?
Well, you know,
Buzzed.
it's like, I'm a lightweight, you know that.
That was the beginning of the night.
And I see on the front page of the New York Times, again, U.S. Embassy, Green Zone, demolished by terrorists, so many dead, the U.S. ambassador dead. I'm like, what the fuck did I get into? This isn't, and I call my sister, and I go, Drew Carey asked me to do this thing, and she goes, well, if mommy and daddy were alive, you would not be going. I go, well, they're not. I don't have any kids, and I'm still scared, and I'm still going to try to get out of it. So I have my license is suspended for unpaid parking tickets. My passport's expired because I'm a bum. And my buddy Steve Ross, who's actually in town staying with me this week, he was like an advance man for the USO and the Department of Defense, and he somehow worked it all out. And even though I was trying to get out of it, I couldn't get out of it. And I couldn't.
It's meant to happen.
I didn't have the balls to say to Drew, I'm scared.
Right.
And I go see Larry Gelbart. Larry Gelbart was the creator of the MASH TV show. He wrote jokes for Bob Hope early in his career. I said, how do you make soldiers laugh? I only know my uncles from World War II. I don't know anything about these other than like what I saw in war movies and Marines, and they all seem like the worst crowd. Like they're not going to get my ball busting. And he gave me a bunch of tips. He said, make fun of the commanding officer, and then the troops will love you.
Right.
I call it vicarious insubordination.
Right.
And he said, you know, try to give them a taste of home. Talk about stuff that's not there, that's back home. You know, take their mind off stuff. And a bunch of other pointers. And I was like, okay, I think I can wrap my mind around this a little bit. And I'm flying over, and I say to Drew, you know, he said, anything can happen. Now I'm starting to get more nervous. And we stop in Amsterdam to refuel and catch a military jet into Kuwait, then into Iraq. And now I'm realizing that this is a secret mission, and there's no itinerary, and I don't even know what bases we're going to. This is very early on, where now Saddam's palaces have all been overrun by the U.S. military, but Saddam is still alive. So you see statues getting toppled. You see Marines swimming in Saddam's pools. I'm sitting on his toilet making jokes. Like, it's like, I got a helmet on. I got a bulletproof vest. And
at this moment is when you're like, fuck Drew Carey.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's a lot of that. I said Drew Carey, the Marines love Drew Carey because they love blondes with big tits. I called it Operation Enduring Diarrhea. And I'm immediately dehydrated. I have to go to like a medic tent in the middle of the desert where every morning under the cover of darkness, they would fly us to a different FOB, forward operating base. Some of them had names, some of them didn't. Sometimes they were like, I was at Abu Ghraib prison. where the audience had no name tags because they're all interrogators. I'm meeting not the yahoos I saw in war movies, but like engineers and mothers and fathers, and they're starved for entertainment. They're completely, I don't want to use the word abused by the situation, but their government is dropping them into this unwinnable situation. And I'm a pacifist. I'm the peace sign guy. Like, none of this made sense to me. I thought the government and the military were the same thing. It wasn't until I actually got my boots on the ground in a war zone that I realized, oh, these are human beings. And there's this other industrial war complex that's happening, and these people volunteer for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's just for a college education. Sometimes it's to get out of jail. Sometimes it's for a lot of different reasons. And I realized, these are the best fucking crowds now I'm in an airport hangar. I haven't slept in 24 hours. There's like 15,000 people. They're sitting on tanks and planes. And I'm up there doing the same shit I do at the Comedy Cellar. But I took it a little bit of the Larry Gelbart, like, hey, General, nice to see you back in men's clothes, whatever. Like, you know, I'm working, I'm being myself, but like, I'm also assimilating or trying to. And I realize that I'm seeing things that I'll never be able to explain to my friends. So I pull out the video camera and I'm holding it out the window of Blackhawks, flying over these mosques. One night we leave at 5 a.m. to go to Tikrit, Saddam's hometown. We leave in darkness and we come back that night, you know, 15, 16 hours later after doing a couple of shows, and they say, we had to move your stuff. There was a mortar explosion on the 8th floor of the hotel.
Wow.
I go, what? And I see the damage, and I go, well, where are we sleeping? They go, well, it's still the safest place to sleep.
Wow.
So now I'm at risk. Like I'm fumbling for Ambien. I'm a shaky, nervous person in a war zone, and I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, but yet I something bigger is happening to me. I'm evolving as a human being. I go, these motherfuckers at the end of the day are fighting for the right for me to talk shit. I'm not going to tell them what's right or wrong, that they should be there or shouldn't be there. All I want to do is make them laugh. And it's the simplest form of my job. It's just to make people laugh. It's not some obnoxious drunk guy at a comedy club. It's really pure, honest people who need some kind of break.
Yeah.
And I started paying my taxes after that. I started reading the newspaper after that. I started caring about this stuff in my act and in my comedy. And it made me an American. That's when I basically went from being some punk to being a patriotic person that cares about where I live.
Word up. That's a hell of a story. Man, thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Thank you. Everyone said thank you for coming, and I kept saying thank you because I was changed from it. And I did shape that footage into a documentary that I'm proud
Patriot
of.
Act.
Yeah. You can find it online. A Jeff Ross home movie. Drew Carey, Kyle Dunnigan are in it. Blake Clark was with us, and he was a Vietnam veteran, and he'd been in helicopter crashes in Vietnam, and now I'm in helicopters with this guy, and I can see him going through some shit, and I realized that I had something that was not just important to my own experience, but to other people. When you're not a journalist and you're in a war zone, you're just a guy listening. You can see it in the film. These soldiers were telling me things that they wouldn't tell their families. They wouldn't tell a Fox News reporter. They wouldn't tell anybody. And I realized that comedy wasn't just about talking. A lot of times it's about listening.
Thank you for writing the book. I only roast the ones I love. You and I are both authors now. We both have books out. So I encourage people to go get Jeff's book.
Thanks.
I want to thank you for coming out to be a part of the People's Party. And to close out, see, people think that serious rappers can't take a joke. Rakim has a famous song called I Ain't No Joke. He has another famous song called Nobody's Smiling. And he's like the best rapper. So that's our whole shit, to not take jokes. People think I can't take a joke. So can you roast us before you leave? And if you do, Jasmin has to be ready to come back at you.
What? Okay. Jesus. I don't want to do this. Okay, go.
All right, I'll try to do it in a hip hop style.
Okay.
hanging out with Talib Kweli in the place to be. Podcast so long, I gotta pee. You know what? I only roast the ones I love.
Yes.
One day, I'm going to do a full-on People's Party roast.
We should do that. That's a great idea.
That would make me so happy. And by the way, Jasmin is like my sister. I wouldn't want to say anything that would hurt her feelings. Thank you for wearing that shirt today.
I'm gonna have to come to roast battle and see Jasmin get roasted.
You probably don't.
I'm honored to have been one of the very few comics on People's Party. I listen to the podcast. I enjoy it. Thrilled to be here. Thank you both for honoring me with all that awesome research. You brought back a lot of really fond memories.
That's beautiful. We're glad to have you.
Thanks, Talib.
Thank you. Jeff Ross, everybody.
Thank you.